All right, good morning, everyone. This is the Planning, Housing, Economic Development Committee, running a little behind, as you can see, still putting ourselves together. Thanks for your patience. It's April 7th, and we're continuing our review of the Silver Spring Downtown and Adjacent Communities Plan, and we've got a lot of things to get to today, but perhaps things that aren't that difficult either. We'll see. So hopefully we can move expeditiously. Turning it to Pam and Lavu.
Good morning. So today we're going to be covering the remaining plan-wide recommendations. Because it's pretty lengthy, I'm going to try to give page numbers as we go along. For people looking at the planning board draft, we're starting at page 84. The rest of the work session, I'll refer to the page numbers in the packet. So economic growth, which begins on page 2. So what the plan envisions for Silver Spring, and I'm just going to quote here, is with green, walkable streets and a transit connection to all regional centers, trains, and travel hubs, downtown Silver Spring will be a premier location for businesses large and small, new or residential. So jumping to the goals at page 3, they are to make Silver Spring a premier office market, improve the public realm to make downtown Silver Spring more attractive for businesses, retailers, and consumers, strengthen the unique retail market in Silver Spring with its diverse mix of independent stores and restaurants, encourage economic growth that'll be sustainable into the future, and focus on strengthening the retail and business economy in Silver Spring by attracting large and small new employers and retailers and supporting businesses that have been downtown for years. So looking at the recommendations, there are several here. I'm going to summarize because I think that might be a little faster. But encouraging the conversion of obsolete office space to other uses, such as residential, hospitality, healthcare, labs, education, and nonprofits. Promoting ground floor retail to establish retail nodes and corridors where there's already existing retail and pedestrian activity. Considering an incentive for property owners with underutilized street-level retail spaces to build and fit out the space for a retail incubator managed by a mission-oriented nonprofit organization. Creating an incentive that provides a subsidy for retail businesses to complete the fit-out of 2,000 square foot or smaller spaces. Exploring creating a minority business designation program in coordination with the legacy business program. And recommending developing a wayfinding and branding plan that highlights the unique multicultural destinations downtown. I think we talked about this a bit when we were doing Fenton Village, but coordinating an engagement effort with the international business community to designate that area as an international or multicultural business district. So council staff has a few recommendations here. So the first goal says to make Silver Spring a premier office market. But if you look at the recommendations, most of them are centered around retail and not office space. The very first recommendation says encourage the conversion of obsolete office space to other uses, which seems to conflict with the goal of making it a premier office market. So to sort of resolve the conflict there, council staff recommends changing obsolete office space to vacant space. And then council staff can work with planning to find more recommendations that target the office side of things.
Good recommendation. Thank you for being attuned to that detail. Any comments from colleagues? All right. Without objection.
The next recommendation has to do with some testimony that was received. This is at the top of page 4. So the Coalition for Smarter Growth asked for 2 things. One, more incentives and programs to help businesses develop, and then adding a recommendation that's in the Fenton Village section about breaking large buildings up so they can be used for smaller businesses. Council staff does not actually have any recommendations regarding incentives and programs since that language is already in there, but does think it's a good idea to copy that Fenton Village language. So adding a bullet that would say, where feasible and consistent with other recommendations in the plan, new development should be composed of ground floor space that's divided into smaller components instead of large monolithic structures to allow for small businesses to thrive.
Okay.
Okay, and then the next piece of testimony was from the Greater Silver Spring Chamber of Commerce. So this letter questioned a lot of different parts of the plan, but was primarily focused on a lack of data to support some of the goals and recommendations listed here. The Cal staff doesn't have any specific recommendations other than if the committee would like to address this, then we of course have planning staff here. Some of the questions the letter had asked is whether there were case studies showing that a green realm does help improve the commercial market, whether there was input from property owners that were losing tenants or from site selection experts on how to attract employers, and then how the incentives would be recommended, such as by the county or by the owners themselves. So it's up to the committee how you want to, I guess, address that piece of testimony.
Okay. Well, the Silver Spring Chamber is not very positively inclined towards the recommendations in the plan that are focused on the public realm, and has provided comments that they're skeptical that that's a strategy. I'm not frankly sure I agree. I think that's precisely what we've been doing. That's what Ellsworth is all about. It's what Veterans Plaza is all about. You know, to the extent that there's specific resistance to the Green Street idea, you know, I understand that there are property owners that have apprehension about providing, you know, land for wider sidewalks for all those impacts, and I appreciate that. You know, those are tricky issues, and we're going to have to navigate through. But I know that improving the public realm is not the only component of an economic development strategy. You know, I think we would all agree to that. And I do think it's an important piece of a puzzle. And if you're not doing anything else, then it's not going to be enough. But if it's in combination with successful economic development in a lot of areas, you know, it can help add to the mix. Comments here from colleagues or okay. And then I will say, actually, you know, I participated in a process for White Flint 2, preceded White Flint 2, was Executive Boulevard. And the property owners there were facing the possibility that their less urbanized office market setting was not competitive. And we had a lot of conversations about how to make that environment on Executive Boulevard more appealing so that they could lease up their space. And the kind of things they asked for were bike lanes, public realm, and similar improvements. And the same went for Rock Spring. So I think it's always contingent upon the exact environment. And Silver Spring needs more modern infrastructure. You know, we're making some progress, but a lot of the city has the same sidewalk layout and quality that it has had for decades, and we could do better. And when you're in a place that is more appealing, then people will want to be there. And so anyway, okay, Councilmember Friedson, followed by Ms. Wright.
Yeah, well, I perhaps going to turn it over to Ms. Wright, but I just wanted to hear from planning on what outreach was done with current property owners. What was the feedback that you heard, specifically on these questions? I think we all share the interest and the desire, and Silver Spring has the need to reinvigorate, as a commercial, vibrant commercial place. And in fact, that's one of the main recommendations and discussions in the plan. And just, wondering what you heard from property owners, what their feedback was, and how you implemented that as part of the plan.
So, thank you for that question. And I'm going to actually turn that portion of the question over to Atara, because she spent most of the time on the outreach. And then I would like to address the question about public realm. So, Atara, if you could talk about outreach.
Sure, happy to. So we held a bunch of different outreach engagement sessions with business owners. We had some that were group sessions. We also had business owners that reached out to us, or we reached out to them individually. We also walked around and tried to go into places that were open where we could talk to somebody who was either the owner or a key employee to understand their experience about owning, operating, working in a business in Silver Spring. We obviously heard a wide range of things, but one of the conversations we had focused on the public realm in a wide-ranging conversation. Everything from, they felt there were safety issues and lighting issues, but also that there were sort of beautification issues, and that if it was nicer and cleaner, well-maintained, more trees, more green, sort of a nicer, a nicer sidewalk experience in particular, that it would help people, want to move from one business to another and not just come and to go to the one business they were planning to come into and then leave. And we heard how important it is to be on certain streets, because then you kind of get the traffic. And of course, this was all during COVID, so they were reflecting on and this was during sort of COVID when things were really shut down. So they were reflecting on 2019, but I think that's appropriate for this particular conversation, because those things haven't really changed. And as we talked to people as it sort of moved through the pandemic, we heard even more about how not just the public realm is important sort of right outside their door, but actually we had a bunch of the breweries, for example, telling us that they wished there were more larger public spaces where they could hold outdoor events that wasn't Veterans Plaza, that we couldn't have. We needed more places of different sizes to do small and interesting sort of pop-up things. And we needed a great public realm to get us from one place to another. We really heard a lot about that, I will say. And it was obviously not, as Councilmember Weimer said, it's definitely not the only strategy we talked about, but in terms of something that a sector plan can really influence in terms of economic development, we really feel this is one of the biggest things that the plan can contribute in that direction. And it was definitely supported by both the business owners, the residents who live there, and other folks we spoke to who spend a lot of time in the downtown.
And I would just add that, to have a plan promote economic development, it's a combination of factors. I think that we can't forget that throughout the plan, we're adding significant height, and we're making it possible for property owners to get the density to fill that height. So that is a significant economic development incentive. Secondly, we do have many examples in this region, not just in Montgomery County, but in other parts of the region where improvement of the public realm, creation of open spaces has been part of a successful economic development strategy. We have a few slides, but I don't really think I need to show those because I think these are places you all know. In Prince George's County, along Route 1 in Hyattsville, the Hyattsville Arts District has transformed that portion of the county and is encouraging not just small-scale development, but some larger-scale projects near the nearby metro station. And a lot of that was about public realm, was about creating a sense of place. On 14th Street in the District of Columbia, many of you remember 14th Street from 20 or 30 years ago. It was pretty desolate. It is now thriving, and it has an incredible public realm, an incredible streetscape. There has been a bit of a road diet to create areas for buses and bicycles and green space, and that has really transformed 14th Street, and you can see how that activity has changed. If you look in Arlington along Columbia Pike and their whole Columbia Pike initiative, again, it is not one solution, it's a combination of solutions where you provide appropriate zoning incentives, but you also focus on the public realm. And you look at creating a place that, again, people want to come to. I even would note, large office tenants want to be located where they feel there is positive activity. We did an office study a number of years ago, and one of the main things that we heard from that was that, and that I think is still true even with COVID, is that people want locations where their workers feel like it's a great place to work, that they possibly can even live close to work. All of those kinds of things we've been promoting in this plan and in other plans about being able to have a great place to live, work, and play. The Discovery headquarters ended up in Silver Spring, not because Silver Spring was magic, but because there was a combination of an interested owner who had connections to Montgomery County and a set of incentives that the county government put in place. That's true in most of our major office construction projects. So I think that it has to be a multi-pronged approach, much of which we've talked about in this plan, but other kinds of things like incentives and other kinds of packages that Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation puts together, that the county puts together. It has to be that kind of multi-pronged approach to bring major office tenants into a market.
Okay. Agreed. I think the public realm improvements to date in Silver Spring have made a big difference. There have been broader changes in real estate and economic development that have perhaps reduced the impact of those public realm improvements on company location decisions. And we hope that that can turn around. Okay, Councilmember Joando.
Yeah, can you hear me and see my hand? Okay,
Yep.
Good, just making sure. I know that's a little dark up there. I appreciate the comment. I agree. I think the public realm improvements as laid out are very important. As Director Wright mentioned, as a former one of those employees at Discovery Communications who milled his way over to Ellsworth and to the Civic Center, that was a big, people look forward to going to lunch and to leaving and having happy hour and doing whatever and going, doing the things that were in Silver Spring. It was a great point I was going to raise. I'm glad you raised it. And so, yes, I think, this absolutely should stay. We're doing a ton in the plan to encourage, more housing and more office space and more commercial activity. So it sounds like you're in the same place now, Mr. Chairman, but I mean, we should absolutely keep those things in the plan is my view.
Absolutely. And more businesses will improve the public realm too. It'll be more people, it'll be more activity, it'll be more vibrancy. We want that. But the infrastructure matters, and the infrastructure will bring more possibilities. Great. All right, let's keep going.
So the next section is urban design, which is, of course, broken up into a couple smaller sections. So this is at the bottom of page 4. First is building form. So Silver Spring has a diversity of building forms ranging from one-story buildings to high-rises to the houses in the adjacent communities. The goals for this are, for the building forms, are to encourage future growth in downtown Silver Spring that takes advantage of additional allowable height while considering street level experience, views, and building form. New development should be compatible with the urban form and scale of the immediate surrounding neighborhoods. Designing tall buildings with bases appropriate for active ground floor uses and interesting towers, and creating a walkable environment where buildings frame the public realm and the lower floors respond to the pedestrian environment at the ground floor. So council staff supports these goals since they are consistent with many of the urban design goals and recommendations we covered when we went through each of the districts.
Great.
The recommendations here are to prepare design guidelines to define design excellence for new development, to create a design advisory panel requiring design review for all optional method projects in the area, encouraging innovative building forms to allow flexibility in design, such as varying tower heights, setbacks, and building materials, limiting bulky towers and considering architectural features, building articulation, solar orientation, and access to light and air, as well as in the adjacent communities, new development should be compatible in massing and form to the surrounding context. So council staff does have a few recommended changes for this section. First, council staff cautions against a design advisory panel in favor of more objective urban design guidelines. We actually received testimony from the Coalition for Smarter Growth that also talked about this, and I'm quoting from their letter now, that these types of panels too often end up prioritizing subjective design opinions of a small set of residents and can lead to slower progress on redevelopment projects that are beneficial for the community at large. So council staff has a few options here. First is either getting rid of the design advisory panel altogether and instead focusing on the design guidelines to make it more subjective. If the committee prefers to keep a design advisory panel, then I think it's important that the details regarding the makeup of that panel should be in the ZTA implementing the plan. This is something that happened in Bethesda, where the Bethesda overlay zone says that there should be at least one person on the panel who's a resident. If a panel is used, another reason for council staff's concerns is just stressing the importance of making sure that that panel is made of diverse individuals who actually represent the interests of the entire community. So that's the first recommendation council staff has, so I will pause.
All right, Councilmember Joanna, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. Yes, just I agree, but generally with that recommendation, but I did want to hear, I see Director Wright has her hand up, the desire, what's the kind of theory of the case behind the advisory panel? I do share the concern that if we do have one, it should be diverse, and I like the ZTA approach if we do have it, but I want to hear from them, and then I'll comment after. So Director Wright, could you just talk about why you did this?
Thank you. We discussed briefly during the semi-annual that one of my lessons learned in Alexandria was the great value of having these kinds of panels that are made up of a combination of community members and design professionals, and that much of the high quality design in the city of Alexandria was due to the 3 or 4 different design panels that they have in that community. And that is not the historic review. I'm talking about design panels for areas that are not historic. So I'm again going to just tout the fact that the Bethesda Design Advisory Panel, which was the first one of its kind that we did in the county, has been from everything we have heard and what we believe it has been a complete success. It has not delayed the process. We have had applicants and community members tell us of the value they've found. I understand, and again, I appreciate that Ms. Dunn and Ms. Nadeau are very, their areas of expertise are zoning codes and looking at how you can put development guidelines into zoning codes. And I don't dispute that, I don't disagree with it, but the reality is that to get a great design realm, you cannot create just a cookbook. It doesn't work that way. For example, in downtown Silver Spring, we have design guidelines that say you have to create a step back after you've gone up 60 feet or so to create some tower separations. Well, one of the earliest projects we had come in was the Avocet Tower, which is at the corner of Montgomery and Wisconsin, which does exactly the opposite. Instead of a step back, it has a deep set in and creates a sort of outdoor room about 60 feet tall with an incredible artwork that is just coming online. That building is just nearing completion. If we had a set only guided by a set of strict rules in the zoning code, we would not have been able to approve that project. because the project does literally the opposite of what the design guidelines in Bethesda say you should do. And so I think that, the ability to look at proposals, to involve the community in looking at proposals, to make judgments is actually something that, again, what we've heard from applicants in Bethesda is that they actually feel like the whole process has improved their projects, has ended up resulting in a better project. So I could not disagree more with the idea of having a design advisory panel. I think we have demonstrated that it works in downtown Bethesda, and I think it can work in Silver Spring as well.
I appreciate that, and I see Mr. Anderson has his hands up as well. But just on the point of, we all know Silver Spring is very unique, right? It's not Bethesda, and it's a different place with a different set of folks. And we've seen in other areas where there can be competing priorities and different feelings about how things should develop. And I think that will be very true. It's one of the strengths and great strengths of Silver Spring. It's also something that you have to be very cautious of. As with all precious things, you have to protect them and be vigilant. So I don't have any kind of dogmatic or theoretical, dogmatic bias against a panel. I would, if you could speak to, and Mr. Anderson or you, would you be, the ZTA implementation to really dig into what it would look like and who's on it and its responsibilities? That's what I think would be super important.
Yes.
And I'd want to work with you all on that. And it sounds like you're nodding and saying, as far as diversity types of business, who's on it, I think we'd want to have a more robust, unique Silver Spring design for that panel.
Yeah, and I think that the key point here that Gwen said just at the end is that it would be understandable if people had concerns about this, 6 years ago when we did it in Bethesda. But we've done it and it works. And it doesn't just work in the sense that projects are getting improved. It's producing excellent design. It's producing award-winning buildings that are adding value to everything around them. And it's not increasing the difficulty of development. And I submit to you, Silver Spring, this is one of the easiest and cheapest ways to improve the quality of development in a place. It doesn't require anybody to add any sidewalks or green roofs or stormwater management or road capacity or water and sewer connections or anything else. All you got to do is go through a process that basically requires you to think through, how could this project be made not just adequate, but could it be delivered at a quality that adds value to everything around it? That's the basic thing we want from development. And I understand some people are always going to say, oh, well, if you do this, it's going to make things harder. We've shown that using the Bethesda DAP model can not only address those concerns, but make them very workable and deliver better buildings. And if you look at the buildings that were built under the previous master plans in Silver Spring and Bethesda and contrast that to what we've seen delivering in Bethesda over the last few years, I think that that speaks more than any volume of words that we could give to it. There are some garbage buildings in both downtown Bethesda and downtown Silver Spring. We all know it, right? I don't need to highlight them for you. We don't want garbage development. We don't want people throwing up a big chunky box and calling it a day. And I guarantee you, if you don't have some design review, you're going to get developers that will try to get away with doing the bare minimum possible. Yes, you can address certain things through the zoning code, and we do in the CR zones have development standards that are designed to have a baseline level of adequacy for good urban form. But only design review can get us to that level where we're going to be building projects that are winning local, regional, national awards, like the building I'm standing in right now in Wheaton, like the things that we've seen delivering in Bethesda, like United Therapeutics and some of the really interesting buildings they've done. This is really, I'm just amazed we're even having this discussion right now in light of what we've seen with Bethesda.
I appreciate it, Casey. And you keep bringing up your building. We're going to have a resolution to take it over.
That's what I'm afraid of. Yeah, I should just mum's the word. I hate it here. It's terrible. It's so the ceiling's already leaking. It's yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
sure. All right. Well, I defer. I think I agree with the concept. I just want to reiterate. Not only I'm not worried about the slowing down thing. I'm worried about the who's in the room when the decisions are made about on the design panel, the composition. So as long as we'll work with you all on the ZTA on that post the plan. I think I'm okay with it, Mr. Chairman. And I see our staff wants to talk too. So I'll turn it over to you to navigate Ms. Dunn and Ms. Nadeau responding.
Okay, sure. Pam and Lou, if you could address in your response the makeup of the committee that is in Bethesda. I don't like strict guidelines in the code in this context either. I'm compelled by Gwen's comments. I do not want to create community conflict and food fighting over architecture. So, now we don't want to enter into, anyway, let's see how we can navigate this here.
Yeah, I wanted to first clarify that the idea wasn't to codify the design guidelines. The design guidelines aren't something that go in the zoning ordinance. That's something that the planning board approves. It was just this idea that what Councilmember Jawando said, that it's important to think about what the makeup of the panel is going to be to make sure that it's actually representative. So it wasn't about codifying the design itself, but that the zoning ordinance can have more specific details on who is on that panel, like it does for Bethesda.
And Bethesda has one resident, right? That's the
what's
the way
the
it's written
makeup
for Bethesda, yes.
and how would we do that? We would do that through a supplemental ZTA, right? Or are you saying we would do that, not put that in the plan? That would be in.
There will be a ZTA coming to you.
Well, let me ask you this. Is anyone suggesting that we should have more than one resident? Are we going to end up with having a whole committee of residents? And this becomes a democratic process where the majority of the committee rules?
Yeah, I think it needs to be a small panel. That's one thing. We have 5 people on the panel. We aren't talking about, an advisory committee of 15 people or something. And I do think that there need to be people who have expertise in design. But in the Bethesda Design Advisory Panel, there is one resident who happens to be an architect, but he is a resident that was selected by the community. There is another expert in architecture, an expert in landscape architecture, an expert in urban design, and someone's going to have to remind me of the 5th person because my brain.
To clarify, we have a community member, we have a practicing architect, a practicing landscape architect, a representative from academia, and then a representative from the development community.
All right, I guess we can take this up when we get to the zoning text amendment, it sounds like, because that's where it is anyway, or is there master plan language that is relevant? I'm not decided here. I think Silver Spring has had the benefit of actually great design in the modern development. And I think we should recognize that, to a certain extent here, we're talking about fixing something that isn't broken. But I also appreciate the opportunity to have a design conversation, and I'm open to a constrained approach that it is, does not slow down the process, but gets us better outcomes. And but if I personally think it's going in the wrong direction, and it's something where the Silver Spring Citizens Advisory Board is now the decider of what the buildings are going to look like, I'm going to oppose that. So we don't have to belabor this. It's in the ZTA. We can come back to it, but we do have a lot to get through today. But let's hear quickly Lavu and then Casey.
Yeah, so for the master plan, there is language in the master plan about the design advisory panel. It says to create a design advisory panel, and then it says design review will be required for all optional method projects. Additional height obtained through the building height incentive zone will be subject to the design review process through the design advisory panel. So I agree that those specifics can be worked out in the DTA, but there is that language in the master plan itself.
And well, and as you know, at the last work session, we got rid of the building height incentive zone area. So that second part of that instruction will come out anyway, because it will be irrelevant.
Casey?
Yeah, just quickly, remember in Bethesda, the design advisory panel does not have binding veto power over anything. The planning board still makes the final decision. They are merely advisory, as the name suggests, and that is in fact the way that has worked. Secondly, I just want to remind everybody, sometimes I hear, if only we had a broadly representative citizen panel to look at land use. It's called the planning board. And I know not everybody loves us, but you know what? You appointed us. We are citizens, residents of the county. We are lay people, and we are charged with the responsibility of applying our judgment to the intersection of the values of the community with the other objectives and ideas of professional planners. And that is the way that it will work in Silver Spring, just as it works in Bethesda, if you adopt a design advisory panel.
All right. I'll withhold judgment on what the panel looks like on the ZTA, but sounds like
point taken.
Yeah.
When we get the ZTA, has the master plan been finalized? Yeah.
So the current plan is to make sure that the council has at least a draft of the ZTA before them when they're reviewing the plan at full council. The ZTA itself won't go through the standard ZTA process, of course, of introduction, public hearing, and then come to PHED committee. That will come after the plan is adopted. But you will have the ZTA before you when full council reviews it.
Gwen, why is it that the design advisory panel, it was the forum for negotiating an alternative design at the AVACET as opposed to the planning board and the staff controlled process?
Well, I mean, just to be clear, I think that my point was that if there was a strict zoning code that said you must have a setback of X number of feet, right, which is like the development standards in the current CR zones that talk about the 45-degree plane adjacent to residentially zoned property. If there was a strict standard, then we would not be able to deviate from that standard.
Okay,
however,
so there's two issues here. One is don't write standards detail into the code. We all agree with that.
Right. And so in the, again, in the design advisory panel, and I do want to echo what Casey said, is it is advisory. They do not make the final decisions on anything, but they do give the planning board advice about how they feel a project adheres to the design guidelines. And in the case of the AVACET project, they basically reviewed it and said, this doesn't really adhere to the design guidelines, but in our judgment, it's a project that does demonstrate design excellence and is worth approving. Now, the planning board could have disagreed with that. The planning board could have said, well, we hear you, design advisory panel, but we still think we have to adhere to the design guidelines and have a setback, and they could have said no to the AVACET, but they took the advice of the design advisory panel as a group of experts, and they agreed ultimately. I know Elza has his hand up, and he is the staff person who works most closely with the design advisory panel.
Thanks, Gwen. I want to emphasize that, the purpose of the design panel is to achieve design excellence. And you can't take the design guidelines and give it to a developer and get design excellence. Beautiful architecture is an iterative process. This is a panel of experts, not only in architectural design, landscape architecture, but these meetings are also well attended by community members who ask questions, who provide comments. So there's
the meetings are attended, so they're open?
They are open. In Bethesda, we've had active participation from many residents. They ask good questions. They're, you know,
I don't mean to interrupt you, Elsa, but that's an important point, right? I think there's a concern here about community participation and equitable participation. And yet that it could be distinguished from the members of the actual advisory board. And if the advisory board is comprised of people with professional backgrounds in design, and there is community participation, then I think we can feel confident in it. That it does not sound to me, not to be critical of our staff's comment here, but that, you know, I think there's a level of understanding here that is a little different than I might have initiated the conversation about. So to me, I'm more comfortable with that characterization of how it works. Pam. Sorry, Elsa, I interrupted you. Was there anything else you'd like to add there?
No, you were perfect.
Okay. Oh, wow. Wow.
Well, let's not get carried away here, Elsa.
Oh.
I just wanted to clarify again on Ms. Nadu's part that really, you know, we get testimony on a lot of things, and our job is to bring them forward to the committee to consider.
Yeah.
This was part of testimony brought to us by the Coalition for Smarter Growth,
Right.
who really questioned whether this was needed. Obviously, the planning department feels very strongly for it. I just want to clarify also, no one on council staff was recommending putting anything into the zoning code except for language regarding the panel itself, which it's done for Bethesda. And part of our issue here, and I think actually part of what's caused the reason to talk about this so much is we don't have that zoning text in front of us yet. And I know it's coming. The idea is actually to get it and to introduce it very quickly so that it is before the full council when we go through our review. It will be, you know, something that the council can comment on as they are reviewing the plan, so the two are in sync. Now, we won't be able to hold the public hearing on it till after the budget season, but those two things do need to come together. When you did Bethesda, those two things were together because you couldn't approve a plan based on something in zoning, or you hadn't yet approved the zoning, or didn't at least know exactly what the language was going to look like. So those things do need to sync, and they will. We'll get that.
Based on that, I'm comfortable that we keep it in and keep moving. Councilmember Joando.
Just one point. I just, since we are awaiting from the planning board, the ZTA, I appreciate our staff's bringing this up because it was raised. I do think that unlike Bethesda, even if there is only one resident, I agree keeping it small and nimble so it can move, and having the majority of people have architectural or other expertise related to design, that the resident, we should consider some, and we can get to this point, but when we consider some sort of language that the resident reflect the small and diverse business community or something like that, whatever we can.
Well, it's design, Councilmember Joando. I mean, I think you can agree also that there are plenty of opportunities for that individual to have design background as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not saying, I'm just saying, I think that is an important feature. I'm not saying exclusive of any other feature, but I just think when you have four people who all are design people, having someone who understands the culture, character, and community of Silver Spring, that's an added value too. And I think the business design side of it will be adequately represented. I think what we worry about is, again, this is double advisory. That, again, the planning board can do whatever it wants. So I think having someone on that advisory panel that reflects that and calling that out specifically would be important. So I just wanted to make that point. I know we'll get to it when we get to it.
All right, we'll get to it. I think everyone should have to have a professional design background. And I think there are no shortage of qualified candidates from all backgrounds. I think we could add that, someone could have more knowledge of the local community,
business community or something. I'm just saying that should be weighted as well. And I see Director Wright. I think we can do both things. I think.
Okay.
We'll definitely look at that as we're looking at the ZTA and the list of members.
All right, great.
I'll just know there are a number of architecture firms, planning firms. I mean, Silver Spring is not short on this professional expertise. So I don't think it will be limited in terms of the interest level or the qualifications. So I personally feel good about that and think that, one of the secret sauces to the Bethesda effort is, number one, there is community participation, very, very active community participation. You can check Facebook and you can get the review of some of the meetings from community members that disseminates to those even who don't go to the meetings, I will say, and that it has a lot of talent and a lot of expertise that comes from our community, which we don't lack in Montgomery County broadly, and specifically in Bethesda and specifically in Silver Spring. So, we'll take it up when we take it up, but I do think we don't have to be concerned about having local candidates who are highly skilled and qualified, particularly in these urban areas where a lot of these professional service companies are located.
I am, all right, great. Let's keep moving.
Okay. Wait, so I just want to be clear for the recommendation for the plan language. For now, the committee wants to remove the reference to the biz is the change that the committee is deciding to make. I just want to be clear on the votes. On
Well,
this
yeah,
issue.
because that's moot. Yeah. Thanks.
So next up is the public realm, which is at the bottom of page 6. So the public realm includes all outdoor space that's publicly accessible. So streets, parks, sidewalks, alleys, plazas. The listed goals here are to introduce new public spaces in downtown Silver Spring that strengthen each district, contribute to community identity, and improve access to public spaces for all. Improve existing public spaces to contribute to community health and connectivity. Focused on the existing local streets as neighborhood spines and convert these to resilient, complete streets, and activate underutilized spaces, both publicly and privately owned, through temporary placemaking strategies, and council staff supports these goals.
Great. Keep moving.
Next are recommendations. So the first is implement the green loop concept on the streets indicated in section 2.2, which is the green loop section. Encouraging public and private property owners to consider tactical urbanism as a form of placemaking, including the following strategies: temporary plazas, which are public open spaces created out of underutilized space adjacent to existing streets or open spaces. Temporary parks, which is a use that's a part of the street, usually 1 or 2 parallel parking spaces where people can gather, socialize. They can have planters, tables, platforms, and they're usually temporary, experimental, or seasonal. And then outdoor eateries, which of course take place in front of storefronts, either directly adjacent to the building wall or along the curb. And with this one, it's important that the sidewalk is wide enough to accommodate both the eating area and adequate pedestrian access. This, of course, is something that was done very often during the pandemic. And lastly, activating spaces with placemaking efforts, including public art and programming that celebrate and highlight the diverse cultures of downtown Silver Spring. So council staff supports those recommendations, of course, notwithstanding any changes that the committee made when reviewing the green loop. I believe that these recommendations are consistent with any changes made there, but we'll make sure to double check in final drafts.
Terrific. Thank you.
The next section is resilient downtown. This one's also broken into a lot of smaller sections. It begins at the bottom of page 7. So the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments identified the region's most direct climate hazards as extreme temperatures, rising temperatures, increased precipitation, and drought. The plan notes that while the plan can't address all climate impacts, one thing that can be done is corrections made in urban planning. There is a reference to Thrive here, so council staff, of course, recommends removing that reference, as we've done throughout the entire plan.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
gout's pretty bad too, though, so we could,
also removing any doubt.
we don't want any gout.
Oh, I missed that. Definitely don't want that.
So for the goals, reducing surface and heat island temperatures, supporting a goal of net zero carbon emissions by 2035, which is in of course, the county's climate action plan, implementing the green loop concept since it creates shaded, performance-based complete streets, increasing tree canopy cover, green cover, and native plantings, I'm going to give a quick shout out here to our new county tree, the black tupelo, improving air and water quality and mental and physical health, and then supporting the growth of urban agriculture and local food production and processing in the downtown, and council staff supports these goals.
All right.
So next is environmental health and equity. This is the middle of page 8. So as stated in the plan, effects of climate and environmental equity are often most acutely felt in lower income, elderly, and minority communities, since there's often been distant or inaccessible parks or open spaces. There's fewer shade, trees, and vegetation, poor quality housing and insulation, low energy efficiencies, reduced access to nutritious food, and lots more. These conditions, of course, create chronic physical, mental, and economic stress, as well as illness. So the definition of environmental equity is the protection from environmental hazards, as well as a guarantee of equitable access to environmental resources, such as parks, open green space, trees and vegetation, community gardens, and energy efficient buildings. So the goals are to provide equitable access to quality natural resources, such as parks, green space, community gardens, and the Green Loop, providing equitable access to cool areas with native tree and vegetation cover, and encouraging all new construction to exceed county minimum standards for energy efficiency. So council staff supports those goals as well.
Okay.
As for recommendations, they are to expand vegetated parks, open spaces, and amenities within a 5-minute walk for all residents, implementing the Green Loop throughout the districts, and then designing parks and open spaces with native canopy trees, shrubs, grasses, and flowers. Council staff supports those recommendations, of course, subject to any changes made in the transportation and parks section, but they seem to be consistent. So.
Okay.
The next section at the top of page 9 is nature-based solutions for urban environmental needs. So this section doesn't actually have any goals or recommendations. It just provides a definition for nature-based solutions, or NBS, which are incorporated into some of the later goals and recommendations. In the staff report, council staff didn't recommend adding any goals or recommendations here, but upon further thought, I actually think a better idea might be to move this into the introductory language, just so it's consistent with the rest of the sections, with the rest of the whole section, sorry.
Okay.
Oh, and the definition of nature-based solutions is sustainable planning, design, and engineering practices that weave natural features and processes to mimic nature in the built environment. They aim to tackle climate change, food insecurity, water resources, natural disaster risks, and lost ecological performance. So the recommendation would be to just put this at the top of the resilient downtown section instead of making it its own, since there aren't goals or recommendations here.
Say that again.
So the way it is in the plan is every section has corresponding goals and recommendations. This seems to just be a definition since it doesn't have that. Looking at the entire resilient downtown section, I think the idea was to provide that definition since NBS are referenced later in other sections. So I think rather than making it look like it's its own section, just make it a paragraph in that opening page about what a resilient downtown is.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Without objection.
Without objection.
So urban heat islands and tree canopy. I think this is page 9 in the packet. So urban heat islands occur when urban areas have substantially warmer air temperatures than the suburban surroundings due to increased impervious surface color, and vehicle and building heat emissions. So Silver Spring is particularly susceptible to this because there's a very high impervious cover. I believe it's 77%. You'll see a few images in this part of the plan. And in the summer of 2020, street temperatures got as high as 155 degrees Fahrenheit, and of course is expected to increase as climate change gets worse. So the goals here are to reduce urban surface and air temperatures through the application of nature-based solutions throughout Silver Spring, and increase biodiversity and urban beautification. Council staff supports those two goals.
Yep.
And then for recommendations, implement the principles of the Cool Streets recommendations, which will be included in the design guidelines for new site development and street renovations on both public and private property. To plant diverse, stratified, climate, and region appropriate native tree species, which reduces vulnerabilities and diseases. And typically you choose species that are able to thrive in a changing climate. Prioritizing the urban tree canopy and the green infrastructure, targeting the hottest streets. And you can see where those are on map 27. Encouraging a minimum of 35% green cover for option method development projects, which can be achieved by providing an intensive green roof of 6 inches or deeper on the rooftops of buildings, providing native canopy tree cover on the landscape of the project site area at ground level, providing a combination of tree canopy cover and intensive green roof, reducing on-site energy generation, and then all new roofs not covered in green roofs or alternative energy generation should be cool roofs or active rooftop uses. And then considering a cool roof initiative that encourages property owners to paint their roofs with reflective surfaces, which would also reduce the effects of heat island by as much as 33%. Encouraging property owners to take advantage of the free Tree Montgomery program, and then applying sustainable sites initiatives. So council staff supports the intent here. We did receive testimony from United Therapeutics talking about how this could be a really heavy burden on property owners, because that 35% for some projects might really dig into their developable area. Council staff does believe the word encourage confirms it's a goal and not a requirement. But if you go to the bottom of page 11, you'll see some suggested amendments. And basically what they do is they sort of soften the language a bit, so it's all less prescriptive. So adding phrases like where practical and consistent with other plan objectives, instead of saying they may achieve this requirement, say they may provide green cover, and then other amendments. I can go through them if you want, but they're at the
No, I
bottom.
think those are important. I mean, here we've had a developer doing a net zero building, struggling with these requirements. I think we've got to be a little more flexible here. Councilmember Friesen.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think all of the staff recommendations are good, and I'm supportive of them. So I just wanted to say that. But I also just had a quick question. The Free Tree Montgomery program, it's a great program. And I was just wondering, we hear about this a lot, and I know Park and Planning hears this a lot from residents who are concerned about the tree canopy, and particularly in our urban downtown areas like Silver Spring, like Bethesda, as we've talked about quite a bit here. There is understandable concern about it. When we say encourage all property owners to take advantage of this, I'm just wondering, what are we doing? I know Park and Planning is undertaking an effort now to look at tree canopy and others, but specifically on this program, are we working with the regional service centers? Are we working with the urban districts? How are we outreaching to folks, for this free tree program? And, can us as council members help? Because, I don't think it's advertised perhaps as much as it could be, particularly to those who are not, maybe not as aware of the program. So maybe Ms. Wright, you could share with us.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of years ago, we hired a person I call our tree czar, Kristen Taddy, who is working on all of our tree programs here at the planning department. She also collaborates with other, we don't run all the tree programs in the county. There is a street tree program run by DOT. There is a trees on individual lots program run by the DEP.
And that is actually Tree Montgomery, isn't it?
Well, we have, again, in our Reforest Montgomery, we have the ability to provide trees, coupons for people to purchase trees. And we also have all of the elements of our forest conservation law, which also include a fee in lieu program through which we are working with different property owners to plant trees. Those are mostly in areas that are forested. The tree program at DEP also has a fee in lieu, and they can plant more in urban areas. And the DOT program can plant along streets. So I'm going to I know Robert and Elza, who are both very involved with those programs, have their hands up. I did want to get in one last thing, which is we don't have any real concerns with the council staff's suggestions, except for one thing, where they say that individual developers can achieve their 35% green cover by providing native canopy tree cover in the right-of-way and or on the landscape of the project area. We're a little bit concerned about that in the right-of-way issue because we also know that once trees are in the right-of-way, they can come down if there's a transportation project. We certainly saw that with the purple line of a number of large trees that were planted by the developer near Whole Foods and were there for quite a few years and then ended up having to come down because of a transportation project. So we do think to meet that 35% cover, it should actually be on the applicant's property, not in the right-of-way. But I'm going to let Elza and Robert talk more about the tree programs.
I was actually going to speak to the green roof, and in terms of the way we've been implementing it in Bethesda, I think Tina Schneider on our staff did a lot of excellent research going out, and thanks to one of Councilmember Friesen's constituents who identified the technology to accurately measure surface temperatures and went out and did a lot of work to look at the temperatures in downtown Silver Spring that Ms. Nadeau mentioned. And I think the plan acknowledges and recognizes that reducing heat coming off roofs is one of the major ways to reduce that. I think projects in Bethesda have been doing a 35% green cover for 5 years. They're getting stormwater credit for it. There are provisions, there's flexibility for folks that are doing solar. So I think there are already flexible ways of allowing people to meet this recommendation. So I wanted to say that, and I wanted also to double down on Gwen's comment about the right-of-way. I think that's an entirely separate issue. There's ownership and control, and so again, strongly recommend leaving it out the change for counting trees in the right-of-way.
Okay.
If you don't mind, I'll follow up on that. I definitely agree with Elza and Director Wright's position on the coverage, because there are flexible ways that we've addressed the 35% and both, definitely in Bethesda, and been very flexible on how that is treated. The one thing that I was going to comment on in addition to what both of them did was we have worked really closely with the urban district in Silver Spring and with BUP in Bethesda to identify areas where trees need to be replaced. They have different programs that they can dip into to obtain and purchase trees. But our staff has worked with them well over the last decade to identify areas where we can change trees out that have not done well, but also identify areas that need to be replaced so that we have that coverage within the urban areas that we really need. And I think a big part of what this plan does is address that. And I think, as Elza pointed out, Ms. Schneider and others really looked into kind of that coverage within the downtown areas for Heat Island, but also canopy coverage as well. So we'll continue to do that with the new urban district director, regional directors, as we have in the past. So thanks.
Okay, so minus the right-of-way, counting street trees in the right-of-way language here. Okay. Great. Thumbs up
It's
here.
not right. It's saying above it, it says a project may provide green cover by. So I mean, it's a modest tweak to that. I'm fine with that personally.
Just to be clear, I was suggesting staff language minus the.
Yeah, sorry. I was just noting that in the staff language above it, it says a project may provide green cover by, and so I was just noting that this was a modest change. I mean, I understand the concern, but I think a modest change. So I was just saying that I'm supportive.
Okay.
So just so I'm clear, what are we?
I don't know what Andrew's talking about exactly because I'm not seeing that specific language, but
Yeah,
the motion was.
these are sub bullets. These are sub bullets.
Yeah, I just don't see the may that you're referring to.
Yeah, in the
It's
end
in
of
the
the
first
main
line.
bullet, in the end of the main bullet, the staff language adds a project may provide green cover by. And then the
Right.
second sub bullet
I see.
is
You're saying it wasn't.
providing, and then
it wasn't
we're
an
eliminating
entitlement.
the underlined in the right of way and or we're going to eliminate that, it sounds like, and then keep the on the landscape of the project site and eliminate area at ground level.
Yeah, I think our point would be is if it is allowed in the plan to provide the necessary green cover in the right of way, then that is absolutely one of the first proposals we will get in each development application.
Yeah, no,
And so
yeah.
we're just sort of suggesting that in that second bullet, just have it read providing native canopy tree cover on the landscape of the project site, semicolon.
Got it.
Was agree to agree. Sorry, I was just trying to clarify to make sure we were all saying the same thing.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Keep going.
So next is
Can I-
energy and
I'm sorry,
Sorry,
can I
go
bring
ahead.
something up?
Mhm.
That I meant to bring up a few moments ago on the plan wide resilient downtown. The idea of noise reduction. I don't want to say pollution, but it's something that comes up as in the context of both Hans and I and others served on the nighttime economy task force, and there's that has happened all in the last 10 to 12 years, and I just maybe it's more of a question for planning, and we don't have to include it now because there's no language ready, but I'm understanding that there are certain design opportunities as far as like how thick glass can be and what people, realizing that you're building in an area where there is nightlife. And do you all already consider that? Is there something that could be considered here in line with that for future development? So I guess that's to the planning board. I just wanted to raise it since we're here and it's something happening.
That's a great question, and I'd like to ask Elsa. I know we require noise studies on other regulatory projects, particularly if they're near a very busy road. And then we do require that the builder needs to have, triple glazed windows and other kinds of things to make sure to not have a lot of noise inside the unit. But do we do that in urban areas, Elsa? I just don't know. Oh,
Yeah.
Robert is nodding yes. Uh-huh.
So there's for noise, there's a standard for outdoor spaces and then a standard for indoor for residential units. For the outdoor standards, folks typically get a waiver because you're in an urban environment and the things you would have to do to protect from noise we don't want to do. For right now, for residential units, there's I want to say 45 decibel limit that is conditioned as sort of a standard condition of approval for all units, and a certain number of units have to be tested. So there is a noise standard now.
Okay, well, I'm not going to do it on the fly, but it's something we might want to think about revisiting in light of whether that's appropriate or, in testing more units or, I just want to raise it as an issue from maybe staff so we can come back to it at a future point, but because I think it's something that we're going to, hopefully, if we keep having robust nightlife, we'll have more of, not less, and more development and more housing. So just want to bring that up. Thank you.
Yeah, council staff can work with planning staff to see if there's a way to add a bullet, probably, I guess, in the resilient downtown section. So it doesn't look like the plan is silent on the issue.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
That was not a pun, I promise. So next up, for energy and carbon emissions. So burning fossil fuels is a leading cause of climate change, of course, and more than 50% of the county's total carbon emissions come from building inefficiencies. So the plan aims to reduce building energy demand by increasing on-site energy production, reducing reliance on non-electric automobiles, and sequestering carbon through NPS to help meet the county's net zero carbon emissions goals by 2035. So the goals are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and energy consumption, to increase carbon sequestration capacities on public and private property, to support the county's net zero carbon emissions goals, reduce vehicle miles traveled per capita, support and encourage maximizing energy efficiency on all sites, and support and encourage the use of regenerative renewable energy. Council staff supports those goals.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I thought you were ending. Please continue.
For recommendations, optimizing building and site orientation to maximize passive and active solar energy, support and encourage on-site alternative energy such as solar, geothermal, and future renewable resource technologies, support proposed and future affordable housing development projects that incorporate emergency energy hubs. So on-site energy hubs provide backup solar and battery storage during local and regional energy outages. Encouraging exceeding the county's minimum energy standards and striving for net zero, net positive, and/or living building standards. And lastly, for public and large properties and consolidated land parcels that have more than one building, to encourage the use and installation of decentralized and renewable clean energy systems. So this would be something like microgrids and other dependable electricity sources, which reduces the reliance on distant power networks and on non-renewable resources, as well as susceptible power lines. So council staff supports those recommendations as well.
Okay, sounds good. Editorial comment. I don't know that carbon sequestration is a meaningful idea in this context. I'm not sure. I think it's, it's unclear, the science of this in general, but I think certainly in this context. So I think someone's getting a little carried away there, but no harm, no foul. Let's continue.
Are you recommending removing it or just?
No, because then someone
Okay.
will say Reamer hates carbon sequestration, and that's the way politics works. So why let, I'll leave something that is functionally irrelevant in the plan without objecting. But I will ask our planning team to keep focused on what is real and what is not. Thank you.
So moving to the bottom of page 13, which is water quality. Again, I think we mentioned this earlier, but over 70% of the plan area's commercial and industrial area is impervious surface. So impervious surface stops stormwater from infiltrating into the ground, which causes runoff, which moves debris and oil and other contaminants to nearby inlets and waterways. Relevant to this plan area, that would mean receiving streams of Sligo and Rock Creek, which have had fair to poor water quality and degraded aquatic habitats due to this water quality issue. So the goals for water quality are to reduce untreated stormwater runoff and runoff rates, as well as improve water quality. Council staff supports those goals. And then the actual recommendations are to utilize active stormwater management strategies to minimize deviation from the standards in Chapter 19, which is the county's erosion, sediment control, and stormwater management code, to maximize green roof stormwater credit using an 8-inch soil medium or an approved equivalent. This increases building insulation and reduces that urban island effect, as well as increases opportunities for planting native plants, which encourages native insects and other species biodiversity. The next recommendation is to consider using rainwater catchment cisterns for irrigation or other allowable uses within the zone, to minimize the impacts of development by installing green infrastructure. So this can include bioretention areas, stormwater trenches, structured cells, stormwater planters, permeable pavements, and other technologies. If you look at the plan, there's a few pictures to show examples of that. Designing stormwater facilities that are separate from street tree panels to make maintenance easier. Where surface parking is retained, integrate vegetative stormwater management, as well as solar systems that cover a minimum of 35% of the surface parking area. Integrating environmental site design into the right-of-way for all new and proposed roads and retrofits. And then lastly, providing decking over linear stormwater treatments to maximize treatment size while not inhibiting pedestrian use. And council staff supports those recommendations as well.
Okay.
So
Great.
top page 14. So this is transportation. I want to clarify this is transportation as related to resilient downtown. So the goals here are to encourage pedestrian and bicycle travel within the plan area for local trips, which of course reduces carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions, and then enhancing ecological performance of public rights of way. So council staff supports those goals, which seem to be consistent with what was discussed in the transportation work sessions. And for the recommendations, providing a healthier, cooler, more comfortable pedestrian experience along streets and open space through many of the ideas that were associated with the Green Loop, and planting native canopy trees, prioritizing lower income areas, as well as the hottest streetscape areas, which again are on map 27. During street renovations and routine replacements, to consider installing smart street elements. So that can include solar lighting, solar metering, solar crosswalks, LED lighting, etc. Implementing cooling strategies into all streetscape plans during the site planning process, using the Cool Streets recommendations, encouraging car-free, flexible, and car-light streets, encouraging more vehicle charging stations than are currently required on private property, as well as within the right-of-way. So council staff supports those recommendations as well.
Okay.
All right. Lastly, for resilient downtown is food security at the top of page 15. So the goals here are, well, first, so Montgomery County Food Council's 2017 Montgomery County Food Security Plan envisioned people having safe, sufficient, nutritious food. Of course, COVID exacerbated some of those inequities. I know council's talked about that extensively. So the goals here are to support affordable retail and food service rental space, encourage local food processing, storage, and kitchen space, supporting food distribution and aggregation hubs, access to affordable, walkable, and healthy food, and access to reliable long-term agricultural opportunities. Council staff supports those goals. And then for recommendations, allowing commercial food kitchens, food processing, and rooftop farms as accessory commercial uses in the plan area CR zone. So that, of course, will be reflected in the ZTA. Increasing local capacity for the production of culturally appropriate foods, supporting the establishment of healthy corner stores and farmers markets, as well as supporting on-site community composting and education hubs. So council staff supports those recommendations as well.
Okay, well, I just want to say here, I certainly think we should allow community food kitchens, processing, and rooftop farms. And if a property owner wanted to build them, that'd be great. We have reserved 1/3 of all the land in Montgomery County for farming. And, you know, I don't know that we want to start to say that the CBDs should have farming as a priority as well. We can turn the whole county into, you know, food production, but we've got a lot of competing goals here. So, you know, we have reserved 100,000 acres of this county for farming, and I think we would want to allow people to do this. But you know, how do you match carbon sequestration with farming? Those are sort of completely at odds. You know, we've got staff recommending that no one should touch the ground, and then you have to touch it all the time. You know, anyway. All right, we keep going.
So the next section is community facilities, which begin on page 15. So first is safety and security. The goal here is, of course, maintaining a downtown where pedestrians feel safe to walk throughout all the districts. And council staff supports that goal. And then for recommendations, ensuring consistent street lighting, as well as a comprehensive wayfinding study for all of downtown Silver Spring. I'm abbreviating here as we move along, since council staff supports that recommendation as well.
Okay, so safety and security goals. Right. Okay.
Next is homelessness and housing insecurity. The plan recognizes Silver Spring as a hub for services for the homeless and housing insecure. An example given is Progress Place over by Georgia Avenue. So the goal is to continue providing enhanced housing and support facilities, which council staff supports that goal. And then for recommendations, supporting ongoing partnerships with service providers and civic organizations. Of course, promoting the development of additional affordable and deeply affordable housing, and then working with service providers to provide sufficient spaces that are welcoming and supportive, including installation of improved wayfinding. Council staff supports this recommendation as well. There is one spot where it says sufficient places, and in reading it, it's unclear whether sufficient refers to the number of places or the quality of the places. So I put a suggested edit on page 17 that would change sufficient to more, just to make that clearer.
Okay.
And then lastly for this section is Montgomery College. So the college has been there since 1950, serving almost 8,000 students from 140 countries. There's no goal here, just a recommendation to continue working with the college to develop opportunities to expand the campus program, and council staff supports that recommendation as well.
Okay. Well, I just want to say again here, the college has had a long-standing idea of having a building along the train tracks in Jessup Blair. I don't think there's anything in this plan that conflicts with that. The college does not seem to have any real plan for that, and it may just be, at this point, not real enough to spend time on. But welcome the college's expansion throughout Silver Spring as well, and we'll keep moving.
So next up is historic resources, which I am going to pass off to Ms. Dunn.
Hey, thank you. So the last section I think we're covering today are historic resources, the section for plan-wide recommendations. And it's basically organized following the primary documentation or designation methods that are used for historic preservation. And the first one you'll see in the plan is the master plan for historic preservation. And it just indicates to people who are unfamiliar with it that the county has adopted the master plan for historic preservation in 1979. And the plan includes all officially designated historic sites and districts. And the council's very familiar with this, as you've recently approved a site, which was the Mesrobian House. And now you have before you, the council will have before it next week, or sorry, following the recess, the Potomac Overlook District. So they'll be familiar with both designating districts, designating sites. And the Historic Preservation Commission is the body charged with identifying and recommending designations and then regulating the historic sites and districts as they are approved by the council. And the goal in this section is to protect and preserve the resources listed in this master plan, educate property owners of historic properties about the benefits of the Historic Preservation Tax Credit Program, promote the adaptive reuse of historic properties while retaining the character defining features, and assist property owners with the National Register of Historic Place nominations to promote their use of state and federal tax credits. And staff supports these plan-wide historic resources recommendations as they relate to the master plan for historic preservation. In this section, the plan though also does highlight the Silver Spring Shopping Center and Theater. So it has sort of some language related to that. It is, as everyone has talked about, we reviewed this when we were doing the Ellsworth District. It is that Silver Spring Shopping Center with the crescent-shaped parking lot in front of it. It was recommended as an opportunity site in Ellsworth, and in that section, as it is listed as an opportunity site, there is reference to this section then to say, if you're reading about this as an opportunity site, go to the historic resource section where there is some background on what the site actually is. And it is in what is called a historic district in the plan area. So we also received testimony. We had a conversation at that time about language in the plan regarding that parking lot as The plan had mentioned it as a way to get into the greater Ellsworth shopping mall area. Historic preservation staff or preservation advocates, not staff at the planning department, had written in and said, could we make it slightly different so that the focus isn't on it as an entryway, but retaining the character of the shape of the
Okay.
parking
Thank
lot.
you for your language here. I would suggest that we just retain shape but not function. I just don't think that there's enough criticality here. I've been giving this some thought, and I think it's the form that matters the most. And adaptive reuse is an essential principle of preservation. And I'm not convinced that ensuring that people can park there adds significant value to the historic relevance of this designation. I think that you can easily interpret what is meant here with or without cars sitting there. It may not look exactly like it does on a postcard from the time, but it does not mean that there isn't sufficient historicism that's conveyed. So I think the shape is probably the more relevant component here. Councilmember Friedson.
Well, I was going to say the same thing. So, I mean, the idea that like a Tesla parked in that parking lot is respectful of the history is just a little bit out of character for what is normally historic preservation. I mean, I agree. I think the shape. I think that the relationship between the building and the street, that all I think is important. But I do agree on the adaptive reuse. I think we should take out function. The use of a building is not generally part of historic preservation. I mean, we do the adaptive reuse as you noted. So I agree with that. I think we should take out and function. I think that would concern me, and I think that the way in which the parking lot is used should be adaptable as long as the shape is respected. I see Ms. Ballo is trying to weigh in here.
Ms. Ballo.
Thank you. I would just add that the planning staff and historic preservation staff agree with Councilmember Reamer and Friedson on this point. We had drafted just some clarifying language to that effect, striking the word function, but adding language that would state explicitly that the significance of the site is not dependent on the retention of the parking lot for its current use. The planning board and the planning staff were fairly explicit about that in earlier conversations, that it's not dependent on automobile access to the adjacent storefronts. And we would support further creative alterations of the space that protects its character defining features, including shape, but again, not the function for parking.
All right, thank you. So I want to note from my friend Debbie Chalfie, who may be watching with the Art Deco Society and provided the testimony, urging us to retain the function. Our historic planning staff and leadership thinks about it differently, and I concur with Ms. Ballo's comments here. Mr. Giwando.
I just don't want to be left out of Ms. Ballo concurring with me as well. So
there you go.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the shape is right, and you all said everything, and I agree with it. Great.
At the risk of opening a box, I don't know what you're talking about another building on that site, where that would be. And I'm not even really sure who to direct the question to, quite honestly. But
I think there used to be a structure on that site.
Okay.
Maybe even a gas station.
There's a gas pump.
There was
There's a gas pump.
There was a small little Art Deco gas station where if you go out there now, there's a sculpture.
Right, exactly. That's like
it was in that little area.
There's
a
area.
Aerial photograph that shows that.
But
so
we wouldn't, I suppose you're saying, the language that we've received says that could somewhat be recreated, through some kind of structure there, building or otherwise.
I think the point of putting that language in, ultimately it's up to the property owner, what they would propose for their own site. And then in reviewing it, the Historic Preservation Commission, because it is a master plan site, they would that would be something that would be considered because there is historic evidence that there was a small one-story commercial structure there previously. So it would not have to remain blank in perpetuity. If the owner wanted to propose something, we would support that.
Right.
And it would have to be reviewed by the Maryland Historical Trust Easement Committee because there's an easement. So, again, I think for this particular document, giving general guidance is great about sort of the vision, which is what we're talking about right now. The details of it, if and when there ever is a proposal that will be submitted, will have to be worked out by the Maryland Historical Trust and the Historic Preservation Commission, and there will be opportunities for community participation. And, if there ever really was a proposal, there would be lots of review.
So that helps explain Councilmember Friesen's comment. A charging station here would actually be in some ways the most historically relevant type of structure. And we wouldn't want to prohibit that, but we have no idea what is in the future. Okay. Great. So staff language minus the function verbiage.
Great.
All right.
Okay.
Great.
And with that, just to clarify, the two minor changes that would occur back in the Ellsworth district under the opportunity sites language and the park and public space recommendation, again, just referencing the Historic Preservation Commission, and again, just using that term character defining features. It doesn't mention function. Features more of a, a shape.
Right.
So hopefully those are okay. I did want to bring up, so I think, later in the section under the interpretive historical and cultural tools that get discussed in this section, the staff had included something about the Morton's department store in that section, that might be a good place to reference that. The other thing I've been thinking about, and I'm sorry that I didn't get it in the staff report, it dawned on me this morning, is for the Ellsworth district, we have two opportunity sites that are both in the historic district. One is this parking lot and center, right? And so there was a recommendation that it's an opportunity site, and it also has a recommendation of the parks and open space. But also there's Fenton building that is an opportunity site and is also in the historic district. And I think for consistency, it might be good to have just a brief statement about what is expected, or maybe not expected, but even just a brief statement about that it's in the historic district, and make the same reference to this section, because it seems odd to have two opportunity sites, both in the historic district, where one is referenced to this section and the other one has nothing. It just says it's an opportunity site. And I think that's what caused the whole set of testimony and concern with the Fenton building and its and a former lessee, which was the Morton's department store, which really did just lease space there, we're told, for a number of years. I just think if we could make a reference to this section, that would be consistent with what we do with this site.
Okay.
Does planning have any concern with treating them equally?
Okay.
I think our only comment would be they're a little different, and that should be explained in that the theater and shopping center are on the master plan for historic preservation. The building on Fenton is within a locational atlas historic district. Perfect. And just make that clarification.
Yeah, absolutely. Whatever is the clearest picture for them, but at least to reference it's in the district. Yeah, that would be great. Ms. Margulies, did you want to?
Yeah, I was going to say essentially what Director Wright said. So, but if we're going to continue to talk about that property, we have a bunch of comments that I'd like to let Rebecca Ballow speak to that. But you can go.
Yeah, we'll do that maybe during the end piece for the where we talk more about the history of it. Like this here is really just like, because this is really about the Fenton building. This is just referencing that building is currently in the historic district. Okay, let me move along because I know we're had a long morning. The next section is about the locational atlas and the index of historic sites. Again, the staff does a great job, provides context for what this is for people that are unfamiliar with it, and then provides map 30 and 31. 30 shows the master plan for historic preservation properties and sites, and the map 31 shows the locational atlas sites. And there's no recommendations here. It's really about providing information, because the next session is about new sites or districts to be studied for future historic preservation master plan amendments. So this is saying we want to look, see if there's any possible properties within this plan area that we want to bring forward to this council at some point in the future for preservation. And the one listed, there's one, and it's the Weller's Dry Cleaning Building. And so the recommendation plan is really about studying that for its appropriateness to recommend as an amendment to the master plan for historic preservation. So staff supports, that recommendation to study the building.
I'm sure you've all seen the news that the dry cleaning business has announced they're going out of business. I've got to get my clothes there before I lose them.
Won't be seeing those again.
But I'm sad to hear that. I don't know if there'll be a new operator that takes the space to continue its use as a dry cleaner.
Maybe they'll turn it into a restaurant. Never know.
That's been my, privately, I've always wanted to open a restaurant there.
Yeah, now's your opportunity.
I think it'd be amazing. Okay. I mean,
you heard it here first, folks.
Yeah. All right. So we'll study it. Absolutely. Hopefully a property. I don't know if the property is going to be for sale. We have no idea. This is one of those things where if the property owner wanted to appeal to the county for some kind of assistance to help refresh that, like through some facade easement funding or something like that, maybe that's something we could call out as recommendation for facade easement funding, because we do have that. We were just, DHCA was telling us about millions of dollars that they spend in Burtonsville with great impact on facade easement. It might be a short-term way to get what we want, in a way that is more supportive, frankly, than the designation process, which could be a long-term, interest.
Well, perhaps I can work with planning staff, and it can be in a bullet in the short term to consider.
Yeah, I think in this situation, it's fair for the community to say, if we love this so much, we're going to help you do something to keep it, because I would imagine there's a heck of a job to repurpose that property, and so on. So there is community value in that. I certainly believe that.
Can we just have the packet know what kind of restaurant Chair Reamer is looking to open?
Well, of course, it would be an Ethiopian restaurant, which would be awkward for me because I don't know how to cook Ethiopian.
I don't think the market, I don't know if you'll do too well in that market.
Probably not.
Saturated.
Probably not.
Should we move on?
All right.
Okay. The next one is the National Register for Historic Places, which is the official federal list of district sites, buildings, structures, and objects of significance in American history, architecture, archaeology, engineering, and culture. And there are goals related to this. They are on the bottom of page 19 of the staff report. The listing in the National Register places no restrictions on what a non-governmental owner may do with their property, up to and including demolition, unless the project does receive federal assistance, in which case some provisions do kick in related to what can happen. But before they receive assistance, if they're just listed on the register, there's no restriction. Historic preservation program staff make a recommendation that they would like to coordinate with property owners and study the designation of the following sites: medical office building on Spring Street, the Metropolitan Building, which is on Georgia Avenue, Montgomery Center, which is located on Fenton Street, something called Operations Research Building at 1400 Spring Street, Perpetual Bank Building on Georgia Avenue, the U.S. Industries Building on Bonifant, and the American National Bank Building on Georgia Avenue. So these, again, the historic preservation staff is, their recommendation is to study the designation of these sites, not recommending the actual designation through this process. Okay, if there's no questions, there's a second recommendation in this section, which is for the historic preservation staff to coordinate with property owners and study the designation of a garden and mid-rise apartment district. Okay, so it's different than the site. This would be creating an actual district. It would be non-contiguous, as these are located throughout the plan area, but it would include all of those apartment complexes that are listed on page 20 of the staff report. And so council staff doesn't have conflict with thinking about this and studying it and talking to property owners, it would again go through the lengthy process of coming before the council as a designated district. You will be receiving information from planning staff on a market rate affordable apartments in the plan area. So you might want to just put a pin in this, not necessarily not recommend this, but put a pin in it till we have that conversation, which should occur at the next work session.
Thank you. I look forward to taking that up then. Ms. Ballo.
Thank you. I just wanted to.
Oh, we lost you there.
Sorry. No, I just wanted to clarify the staff recommendation that this would be for a national register non-contiguous district. So not an amendment necessarily to the county-wide master plan for historic preservation. So the national register district process goes through the Maryland Historical Trust, the National Park Service, and that process is different because also property owners must consent to being listed on the National Register, which is somewhat different than our local process. So I just wanted to clearly set that expectation that that is not a district amendment process that the council here in Montgomery County would be involved in. That has a different review process that our office helps to shepherd through for property owners that are willing to do so.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, my mistake.
Well, that's a very helpful clarification. Makes me less apprehensive about such a sweeping, potential. Great.
Yeah.
So if you could note that, please.
Yeah, I will make that more clear for the council review. And thank you, Ms. Ballo. The next are archaeological resources. There's a section on this. It notes that there have been few investigations in the downtown Silver Spring area and very few artifacts that have actually been found. A lot of this is because there's been a lot of development in the area already before this was something that was considered, and that the potential for archaeological sites in the plan area is limited due to the already extensive land disturbance. But they do have a goal, which is to advocate for archaeological investigations in areas with minimal land disturbance. It does have a note that's primarily located at Jessup Blair Park when projects are undertaken. The intent of this goal staff supports, although a little concerned with the word minimal. Could somebody consider very little work done on a site as minimal disturbance and therefore qualifying for an archaeological investigation? I don't know if there's a way to clarify that. This is a goal, so I don't know whether it needs to be that nailed down, but it just caused a little concern that it seems vague. So maybe Ms. Ballo can comment on that.
I think that we can provide some clarifying language in the plan. Minimal land disturbance is much more a professional term of art for archaeological investigations that we're used to using in cultural resources. So it's, I can see how it would appear unnecessarily vague. I wouldn't advocate adding a number to it in the plan, like X number of square feet or a certain percentage, but we can work with the council staff to clarify this and to give some certainty to what it is that we're advocating here.
That's great. Thank you. Is the committee good with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think to sort of anticipate, Jessup Blair, I think it's important that, we're not setting expectation that Jessup Blair Park will have a deep archaeological investigation before any park improvements are made. So, and I think that's the intent here, is to make sure that we're trying to be precise and refined.
Exactly. To that point with Jessup Blair, if I may, we're fortunate in that, again, Jessup Blair is designated as a master plan historic site. So we have an archaeologist on staff for the planning cultural resources side, and then we have the excellent archaeological staff that are part of the parks cultural resources team. And all of that would be, any ground disturbance would be reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission in Association for a HOP. Typically we don't recommend, if there's a sidewalk and they're putting in a new sidewalk, that doesn't qualify for an archaeological investigation. If there's been a basement dug, we're not going to ask for another investigation. So we would work closely with our parks colleagues during the permitting review process to do what makes sense.
And you have the internal capacity to achieve that. Great. Thanks.
Great. Well, I think we're moving almost to the the last section here, which is the section on cultural and heritage resources. And the purpose of this section is to talk about the preservation and recognition of cultural heritage and history, and that it can be achieved for means other than just a physical building or a site, and to nurture the plan's diverse history and support local business. The plan recommends several new and expanded cultural preservation initiatives be explored and has goals related to this. The first one is establishing a legacy business registry. The second is to study the potential incentives to preserve local independently owned businesses. 3, partner with existing and new local partners to add interpretive histories absent from the present narrative. 4, celebrate diversity, heritage, and history of the plan area. And then the last would support any future recommendations of the street and park facility renaming review project. Council staff supports these in general. One slight change to the very last one, just support the project, not necessarily to predispose what future recommendations will be before the board. And again, these goals are reinforced through the recommendations that follow them, which are to create the Silver Spring Legacy Business Registry, to further the interpretation of historic sites, providing more of that interpretive history throughout the plan area, and support the continued review of the streets in Montgomery County. Again, the language here is better. And again, this is where we did receive, I just bring up the testimony related to the Fenton building, which is located in the Ellsworth district. We've already talked about that this morning, and that it's had an early occupancy by the Morton's department store, and whether, as this is studied further, there is some place for this history to be part of an interpretive cultural piece here or not, but that, that again would be something that could be evaluated as things move forward. It could have, council staff has suggested that at least it be mentioned here. The plan does provide a non-exhaustive list of possible places where interpretive histories are important or could occur. So it doesn't predispose that will be of any certain type, but it could be listed. I mean, we've had the testimony regarding this and the lack of any recognition at all in the plan of the Morton's department store. I know the planning staff does want to talk to this, so I'll stop it here in just a second. But I also just wanted to bring up, it's also a place to possibly mention the Jessup Blair House. Again, a piece of testimony or more than one came in, sort of concerned that there is a lack of focus on the Jessup Blair House. Again, just another bullet that could be referencing it might go a long way. And I'd like to turn over to planning because I know they want to speak to this.
Great. Hello, planning.
Thank you. Our staff really appreciated the additional information that was provided in the public testimony from the Art Deco Society, as also the Silver Spring Historical Society. I know that they were able to, to turn around some information in a fairly short amount of time regarding Morton's as a business. I guess what I would want to emphasize is that our approach to researching the history for this plan and calling out sites in particular, I'd go back to the list of sites that we proposed to study for National Register nomination. We tried to focus our narrative on where there were the gaps, and a lot of the gaps in terms of public interpretation and survey forms that have been written focus on, African American history and Black activism, specifically Roscoe Nix and the history of the sit-ins and the integration of commercial spaces and housing equality within Silver Spring and the Down County area, whereas there's been, very good and abundant interpretation of white businesses, banks, other restaurants, other stores within downtown Silver Spring. We did not, for example, call out, the NAACP did work in the late 1950s and 1960s, pointing out businesses in Silver Spring that were accommodating to African-American customers and businesses that were not. We did not think that was necessary in our histories to point out each of those businesses that were accommodating to African-American patrons that were, that were white-owned establishments. That's one lens of the story. We wanted to focus the history more on the African-American activists and their work here and the sites that were associated with their histories. So while, the story of Morton's as a department store and their non-discriminatory practices regionally it's a good story. It's an interesting story. It adds to kind of the cultural richness of the business history of this area. We don't have yet what we would see as, you know, a number of primary source materials and enough documentation specific to this store and this location that it would I guess warrant a call out on its own at this time. We would like to include language, I think clarifying language for the public as well, that this site is located in a locational atlas district already. There is going to be a separate regulatory review process with the Historic Preservation Commission and with the Planning Board in the future that will delve into, you know, the very site-specific history of this store. But I wanted to give you a bit of that background so you'd understand, so that I guess there would be more depth to understanding for the council and for the public why we called out the spaces that we did, and the spaces that we didn't call out. It's because we wanted to have a different type of focus in the plan, and I'll just stop there and answer any questions you may have.
Councilmember Dwanda.
I appreciate that, Ms. Paulo, the background and the history, and I think it's an important point you made. You know, like that. You want to, and I think it's the appropriate distinction to focus on the activists and those who were pushing for change, not to say that those who were allies in that fight and who had better policies are not important and not relevant. But I think all too often history tends to focus on that as opposed to the change makers. And so I appreciate that nuance. Could you speak to the Jessup portion? That was the other recommendation here to lift that up, and just what are your thoughts in regard to that, those testimony and that it needs to be lifted up a little more?
I think that we can certainly add, you know, some additional language in the text, perhaps. We do have call out boxes, for example, and some of our graphics that I know that the team is working on separately. One, for example, that calls out the history of the first female registered architect in the state of Maryland designed a building here in Silver Springs. So we're doing a call out box on her. Our team and John Liebertz in particular did some really in-depth research about the history of people who were enslaved by the Blair family and the history of enslavement in Silver Spring and farming and those types of occupations, that particular use of the land at Jessup Blair. And we also have information about Native American history on that land. And so the history of Jessup Blair is very well documented in our master plan amendment, and our parks cultural resources colleagues have a lot of information about that already. So we would want to work with them very closely to think of some additional text, but I think that there's certainly room within the plan that we can accommodate that. I don't know if the director wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think that, perhaps we take it for granted that the Jessup Blair house is important, because it is, and it is one of our very significant historic sites in Silver Spring. So I think adding a little bit of language about that sort of just enhances that, and some of the points that Ms. Ballo made about some of the history associated with that site that hasn't really been focused on in past writings would be a great idea. And so I think we fully support the idea of adding maybe a few more sentences about the Jessup Blair house.
Great. And the other thing I just wanted to mention, thank you for that. I appreciate those comments, is I think the recommendations are great. I like, obviously we've talked about in other contexts, the Legacy Business Registry and the need there. Councilmember Reamer's new Ethiopian restaurant notwithstanding, I do think that there is also a really unique opportunity in downtown Silver Spring to talk about, the history of the last, 30 to 40 years of how it became an emergent hub for the Ethiopian community, especially right there in Fenton Village, and into the African immigrant community writ large. And I just think there's an opportunity. I hope that will be something that you, as you're exploring, as the second bullet says, realize that all history is not 100 years ago, and that I think it's important to recognize, even more recent history and in the development of where we're going. So appreciate those recommendations, and just wanted to add that piece to it as well. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you. Okay.
I think that pretty much covers it for today, unless you have other comments on this section.
I had asked you about one thing that I had neglected to address earlier, which was the co-op housing issue. Is that in a different section?
Yes, the co-op housing issue was in the housing section
Right.
that we covered, I don't know, 2 weeks ago now.
All right, so I'll just put this out here while we're all here. One of Silver Spring's interesting, relevant resources is a co-op housing community, Eastern Village, where many years ago, the developer decided of their own volition to build a community that would be an intentional community or a co-op type community, and put into their model and recruited people to purchase its condo, recruited people to purchase those units who wanted to be part of that, and was able to successfully create that. And it has survived, and not only survived, but it's a vital part of Silver Spring. It's very, it's just a cultural feature or a civic feature. And I think it's something that makes Silver Spring, different and interesting among many things that make it different and interesting. And so I just had a recent conversation with some of the residents there, and just led me to think a little bit more that, it's a long shot that adding some language in a master plan might result in, through the development process, a developer saying, oh, I'd like to try that. First of all, condo is not even really what anyone's building right now, so start from that. It's tough. But anyway, I wanted to add a reference to the housing section, just mentioning co-op housing as a option, that we might at least want to have on the board. So in the development process, someone might, maybe a light bulb would go off. So I'll just ask staff to circulate that text, and we won't have to return to, we won't have to spend 10 or 20 minutes on it at a future meeting, if everyone agrees. And then
Yeah, I'm just not sure I'm understanding totally what
there is a section in the housing where we talk about different kinds of housing in the plan area. It's sort of like in our affordability goals, and we would just add to that, among different types of housing we're seeking, co-op housing. That's pretty much it, like literally 3 or 4 words.
So it's on page 88 of the planning board draft. And it actually already has the words cooperative housing. It's like a bullet that just has a long list of different housing types.
Okay, it's already there. Okay. Well, all right, maybe we can highlight it. Okay. And then just another observation from today, I think it was mentioned, but space for nonprofits is called out in the plan. I think that's been a community concern, is whether the development conceives of space for nonprofits as a community resource that we want to try to secure if possible. And that is mentioned in the plan. Great. Okay. Any other comments or topics? All right, so we'll return to this on, when's our next meeting?
Yeah, so we have, we've scheduled one last meeting, which will be on April 20th. It'll be late in the afternoon because the council will be holding your one of many public hearings on the operating budget. But right now, I think we're slated for 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We have about an hour and a half. We'll need to cover the implementation section of the plan. That's where we're also going to see those draft ZTAs that implement much of the things we've been talking about. There are a few other things in the implementation section that need to be covered. And then we'll revisit, well, you'll also review the market rate affordable housing work that the planning department is doing as you requested. We haven't gotten that yet, so hopefully come soon and we'll be able to put that into that staff report. Otherwise it'll go to council. And then we'll return to just a handful or more slightly of individual property concerns, places where either you as a committee decided not to make a decision until you reviewed the rest of the plan, or you've received correspondence during the course of your deliberations, and if there's something to highlight for you. So council staff will be pulling that all together.
All right.
Also, sorry, I was just going to add that the day before, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Pam, is when full council will be taking up the Silver Spring plan.
Yeah.
But they'll just be doing the introduction in districts as we finish at PHED.
Right. We're overlapping just a bit. We need to get this through in May. We all know that for the sectional map amendment to be timely. So you will start with your full council review on the 19th, the day before your final PHED committee review. And we will at that time be covering the introduction in all of the districts, hopefully in one session.
Okay. Was there no option for the 21st for PHED to do?
I don't know that anyone looked at that. You can talk to Selena.
I know I have T&E that morning, but there may be another committee that afternoon. I'm just a little worried we won't have sufficient time that day.
Yeah.
There's Geo that afternoon, I believe, on the 21st, but I'm not clear how long Geo would be scheduled. And if we're already starting at 3 on the 20th, there might be an opportunity to do it after, but that might be something to check for you to check with the clerk.
Okay, let's try that. Let's see if either we could swap. I think you're suggesting possibly swap with Geo, or else simply just go after Geo that day.
You asked if there was any other,
yes,
and I happen to have it on my calendar already. So I was, you might.
So you're saying I have to be the one to ask Chair Navarro. Okay, very good.
And I have a couple of meetings, but I could move them if we needed to do that afternoon.
Thank you.
Could I just suggest, if it's okay with staff and with committee members, I think the individual property items, going through those first, because I think that the more macro level issues would be easier to go through at full council than some of the items, because they're related to some of the decisions we've already discussed and we might be more familiar with them. So I just think it would be, since we have limited time and we may have to take certain things up at full council, if we can do the individual property items at committee to make sure we clear the deck of that. And then if some of the implementation and the more macro level discussions, if we don't get to them at committee and take them up as a full council, I just think it would be a better process. I just wanted to suggest that.
I think that's great. We can organize it like that. And I think we would do the market rate housing piece second, and then last we would do the implementation that's in the plan. That way, if we don't actually get to it, it's a piece that the full council can review after they've gone through the plan as well. It won't change dramatically.
That makes sense to me. Thank you.
All right, great. So we will seek to try this on Thursday rather than on Wednesday. All right.
One last thing, sorry. I pulled up the committee calendar for you, and on the 21st, you do have a GO from 1:30 to 4:30. They're doing compensation and benefits for all agencies and collective bargaining. So I doubt that's going to be a short session.
Not a quick discussion.
Put that out there.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So it sounds like we're sticking to Wednesday.
We're sticking to Wednesday. We will see if there is another timely opportunity. Otherwise, we'll stick with Wednesday. But obviously, it's not going to be Thursday afternoon. Okay. We'll see what the schedule is for T&E that day. It's budget review, so I guess everyone's committee is fairly packed.
They're really packed. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we can try to, really get through those property specific and the housing piece in an hour and a half. And if you don't get to implementation, it really won't be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Maybe it's not a big deal.
Right.
All right. Okay. Thanks everybody. Appreciate it. We are adjourned.
Uma and I had the